All right, we are officially recording. So, first of all, everyone who is here in, I don't know what you call this, the virtual room, thank you for attending. This is our fourth of five interviewing all the Democrats who are running for the Senate race. We very much appreciate your time. And I'm not a fan of introducing someone who can introduce themselves. And so with that, I just want to say thank you, Kimberly Graham, for joining us, and please introduce yourself to folks.
Awesome. Thanks, JD. Thanks for having me. And thanks for running again. We're going to get it this time. So I'm Kimberly Graham. For anybody who's on here who doesn't know who I am, I'm running for United States Senate, hoping to replace Joni Ernst in the United States Senate come this November's election. We do have a 5-person contest for the Democratic nomination in this race. We have everybody is a great person who's running for this seat, in my opinion. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, the Reader's Digest version, who I am and why I decided to do this. So I'm a mom. I have a 20-year-old son. His name is Max. And for those same 20 years, I was 9 months pregnant when I took the bar exam. For those same 20 years, I've also been an attorney for abused kids and for parents here in the juvenile court system. And I've also been a mediator. So I have also done a lot of family law mediation for the past 17 years. I became a mediator a little bit later. I think the United States Senate could definitely use a mediator. So I think that those mediation skills are going to come in really, really handy. You learn things about human nature, and you learn things about how to get people to hear you and how to listen to people when you are when you're a trained mediator. And so those skills, I think, are incredibly important, because I believe the job of being a U.S. Senator, being a representative, is to listen to people, listen to people, listen to people, find out what they need to lead lives of health and dignity, and then go do your best to get those things. You know, obviously I'd be one of 100 votes, you'd be one of 400, and I don't know the exact number, JD, in the House, but you know, we wouldn't be able to just have our way, but we can stand up and advocate for the things that are going to allow Iowans to lead lives of health and dignity. And I think that's fundamentally what our jobs are. So I decided to do this like a lot of people. I think this was sort of at least partially how you found your way to what you're doing, JD, is the 2016 election, which is oddly, you know, maybe in the end, maybe something good will have come of that, in that a lot of people who never would have run for office, I think, in a million years, decided to run as a result of kind of being shocked by the election of, as I call him, President Voldemort, he who shall not be named. And so, you know, I just was appalled, like so many people, and unfortunately not totally surprised that he won, but I was shocked, and I was very upset, to say the least. And I decided that it wasn't only him, but it was people like Senator Joni Ernst, like Steve King, who, you know, I'm pretty disappointed in a lot of the people that are supposed to be representing me. And I'm kind of a commonsensical, pragmatic progressive, right? I don't believe in just complaining. I believe in going out and trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. And so rather than complaining about my elected officials, I decided to look into running for office myself. The election of a handful of representatives in 2018 who had never run for office before, and who just stepped up and said, I'm one of the people and we should represent us, and so I'm going to run, gave me a lot of encouragement, you know, to run myself. So I saw an ad on Facebook for the Ready to Run boot camp at Iowa State University. And that was in December of 2016. And the boot camp was in January, February, and March. And I signed up and I went. At that event, I decided to run for the seat, and spent the next couple of years getting my life in order so I could reduce my work schedule enough to have the time to run. I still work, but I've been able to peel back my schedule so that the last couple of years, since May of last year when I announced the only thing I'm doing is representing all the kids of the participants in the Polk County Recovery Court program. So I represent abused and neglected kids in a recovery court or drug court program, and it's their parents who are in the recovery court program, and then I represent the interests of the kids. So yeah.
Well, that's great. Um, uh, Always fascinating for me to hear how other people decide to take a crack at things and run for office. And it's definitely not easy. So I applaud you for all this and everything that you're going through, and now the curveball of COVID-19 and all of this. And so, no, I appreciate it. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions here to start off. We have 4 groups that are basically the heartbeat of the 4th district. And so the first thing, we're the 2nd most agriculture producing district in America. And so my first question is, we have a family friend around here that the dad, they're on a Century farm. The dad just retired. The son was going to pick up farming, but the dad told him, hey, you're not going to make a dime off this. We're going to rent the land. So after 100 years or so, it's the first time somebody else is farming their own land. What are some of the things that you would do to support agriculture in this time?
Right. That's really sad. And so the first thing that I would say is that farming should never be a nonprofit enterprise. And that is exactly what it has become for far too many farmers in our state and in other states. The thing that would help the most, there's lots of puzzle pieces that would help farmers. I mean, farm suicide rates are up, which is a horrific tragedy. Farm are up, of course. But one of the things that would help the most is something that isn't really very sexy, but it's called antitrust legislation. And, it's not sexy, it's not quick, it's not an instant fix, but we need to be enforcing our antitrust laws. We have them. We could probably beef them up some more, but we do have antitrust laws in this country. But this current administration isn't really enforcing them. And I'm sorry to say that I don't think they were enforced adequately under the prior administration either. I think that we need to do a much, much better job of that. There is somebody, for people that are interested in reading more about this, because I know we have really limited time here, I would really recommend that you take a look at the writings of a man named Austin Frerick. He wrote a really great article, which is a really good, I have it here, it's a really good summary, I printed it out, of summary of what I'm talking about when I say we need to enforce our antitrust legislation and what that means and why it's important. This article is from the American Conservative from the February 2019 edition, and it's called "To Revive Rural America, We Must Fix Our Broken Food System." And it is just like a perfect condensation, condensed version of what is wrong and how we can fix it through antitrust legislation. And Austin is an Iowan, and he ran for Congress in the 3rd district in the 2018 cycle, I believe it was. Super smart man, and has a lot of important things to say about that. Because what people who live in your district and elsewhere in the state who are into farming understand is that, unfortunately, farmers have kind of been, in too many cases, reduced to serfs on their land, like the medieval serfs, right? That didn't actually really own their land. They may nominally own their land, but the problem is that from top to bottom, from the seed to the fertilizer to the price that they get for their commodities on the back end, on the output side, it's all controlled by just a couple of companies, just a tiny handful of corporations that then can dictate all of that pricing up and down that whole chain. And that equals farmers not having much control, not having competition to be able to earn a better living. And there's a lot more. There's a lot more that we can do. We also need to localize our food. Iowa, I believe, imports more food, or it's in the top several, than any other state in the United States of America. And that always blows people's mind when I say that, if they don't know that. They assume that we must be one of the, we must import the least amount of food, right? Because there's so much farmland everywhere. And it's the opposite. We import so much food that we could be growing here. And instead, it's also better for the environment. We have to address the climate crisis. If we grow the food here and we ship it 5 miles down the road to the school, instead of thousands of miles away by shipping or ship and down the Mississippi and down to the Gulf and down, that's just better all the way around. And that food is also healthier.
Right.
Healthier. It's more nutritious, more nutrient dense, right? Because it's not sitting somewhere for a month and a half before we get it into our bodies. So, and we could also do more economically for rural areas with that localization of our food here in Iowa, because we could do what Tom Vilsack used to call value-added agriculture, right? He talked about that a lot. And that means things like, let's say, for example, that we're finally able to grow more than 40 paltry acres of hemp in this state, which would be really helpful because hemp can be used for so many things. Well, why don't we build a hemp processing plant in a rural area? Why don't we have the people who work in that plant get a chunk of the profit? Why not have them be able to create real wealth and have that be some kind of a co-op, right? Or some kind of where they get profit or they get a profit sharing check or something. And we can turn that hemp into protein powder and into protein bars and put it in lotion and shampoo and make fabric out of it. And it's endless, right? It's endless. It's really limited by our ability to get startup capital and our imaginations and our creativity and our ability to be entrepreneurs in this state. And I believe we can do it, but we've got to have people like you and me who are in positions of power to try to pull those levers, to get those things to be able to happen. So there's a lot we can do.
Yeah, no, I actually talked with Austin this week, and one thing he mentioned, which just absolutely blows my mind, is 60%, or he told me this stat, and it's 60% of apple juice is imported from China. And it's just, it blows your mind, because even in this district, we have several orchards down in Harrison County, over in Jefferson County, or not Jefferson County, Jefferson, Iowa, in Greene County. And I know there's others as well. And so it's mind blowing if we could regionalize things. And reading up in Sioux Falls just earlier this week, one of in their Smithfield packing plant, they had 80 confirmed cases of COVID-19. And when you have such a concentration, it's hard to move around. That's going to affect the whole market, the whole industry. And and so the workarounds are very difficult, because since I like to say, since my grandpa's generation, we've lost 90% of our slaughterhouses. Mm-hmm. And we've condensed them, we've industrialized them, and it hurts the rural economy. And so I'm 100% on board with the antitrust stuff. It's the number one thing I talk about.
I know. And JD, I've heard you, I think it's you, I'm pretty 99% sure it's you. I use this term, and I always give you credit, is that we have to mitigate and stop the dollar generalization of rural America. We have got to stop that. It is taking out some of these mom and pop businesses, these smaller businesses that just cannot compete with a multinational conglomerate. Right. And it's not fair that they should have to try. It really isn't. And we've got to try to level that playing field more. And another quick idea that I had that isn't directly farm, but it's definitely a rural issue is, I hear a lot, and I'm sure you have too, when I talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, I hear, and I understand that because I've lived in Indianola, which is a smaller town, for 25 years. We can't afford that. Kimberly, that's great, but I can't afford to pay my people $15 an hour. I'm barely making enough money for me, the business owner, to get by, right? So there's a couple ways that we can address that. And one is we stop subsidizing Exxon and Amazon and Walmart and all that. We stop that, and we reinvest those funds, and we provide either tax credits or some kind of actual help to small businesses, like truly small businesses,
Right.
so that they can afford to then turn around and pay their workers $15 an hour, because then we get into an upward spiral where if somebody makes a better hourly wage, that money is going to circulate in that rural community and it's going to benefit the whole, rural community. So we can do this. We can even pay people $15 an hour to work in a small diner in a small town. We just have to figure out how to do it so the business owner also can still make a good living, right?
Yeah. And one of the best things I've heard, if you're a bar owner, do you care about the $15 that your bartender makes, or the $15 that all the patrons make? And so it's
Right.
more, yeah.
Right.
Moving on to childcare, and this is something that this is a stat that blows my mind, and it's just in Fort Dodge alone, there's a shortage of 1,638 childcare spaces. And this is a problem that's felt all across Iowa and the 4th District. And there's just too many communities that are lacking quality, affordable, licensed childcare providers. You have experience in this, work in the court system of a lot of this stuff. What are some of your ideas for what we could do on the federal level when it comes to childcare?
Right. So every other developed nation has some kind of federalized, that is universal childcare system or program, some kind of universal childcare. And, it's kind of ironic. A lot of the times for many of my platform positions, people will say, oh, well that, we can't do that. Like, we can't do that here. We just can't do that here. We just can't. And I say, look, these are the people that are often the same people who are standing up and chanting USA, USA, and talking about how great the United States is and how we're the best country in the world, but we can't do that. And to them, I say, I agree with you. We're the best country in the world. So we should have the best childcare system in the world that's affordable, that's high quality, where people who provide the childcare are well-trained, well-paid, and unionized so that they have benefits and they have all of the things that they need. Matt Tapscott is a former Marine who's running for Iowa Senate, I believe, in this cycle. Fantastic guy. He's up in the Decorah area, I believe. And he has run, this former Marine, awesome guy, has run an in-home daycare for like the last 20-something years, I believe, in his home. And so he's a licensed in-home daycare provider. He's fantastic. I'm going to do a forum with him as well about childcare, because he has some fantastic ideas, and especially for rural Iowa. So I'm already literally drafting something called the American Childcare Act.
Oh, wow.
Just like Tom Harkin had the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? And that kind of revolutionized life for the better for Americans with disabilities. Well, I want to do the same thing for children and for childcare, and to make investments in families and in children. Most developed nations spend 2 to 3% of their GDP on programs for kids and families. The United States spends 0.6% of its GDP on programs for children and families, including things like universal childcare. So the American Childcare Act, in a nutshell, would expand childcare, provide startup capital if people want to start a daycare like in their home, which could be a huge help for rural areas. We don't have to wait to build a daycare center, right? We can get childcare up and going. We want to license those people, train those people, have those people be considered the highly respected professionals that they should be considered as. These are people who are caring for our very most vulnerable people, infants and children, toddlers who can't even speak up for themselves if they're not being properly cared for. And so we need to provide a lot of training and pay them well.
Yeah.
Now, we already talked about a lot of people ain't even making $15 an hour. How are they going to pay this, high price for high quality childcare? Well, they're not going to be able to do it on their own. And that's where we get into having a universal childcare program so that we have some subsidies to be able to make up that difference. And what I would envision is that, you make so much money, and then as you make more, it's kind of a sliding scale, and you pay a little more, but you don't pay so much that you can't afford it, right? You pay a little bit, and then you pay a little more if you make more money, until some point at which you don't get a subsidy anymore because you're making $300,000 a year and you don't need one, right? Whatever the case, if you're a surgeon or whatever, then you might not need one. but I just think that's incredibly important. And with the American Childcare Act, I would also propose paid parental leave. We should not have mothers in this country, in a moral and wealthy nation, going back to work after a week or 2 weeks after giving birth because their employer provides no paid maternity leave and they can't afford to lose their job or be away from work. That is absolutely appalling. For a nation that claims to value its children, its elders, its veterans, we do not put our money where our mouth is. If you want to know someone's values, show me their checkbook. And the United States is not doing so good in this area right now, but we can do better.
You know, it was after last cycle, I ended up talking with a group afterwards, and it was a mostly conservative women's group. And one of the biggest things that they talked about was a very progressive agenda on childcare because it's a pro-family thing. And it was one of those things where just it really, like I talked about it last cycle, but no one really engaged too much on it. And then afterwards, this group reached out to me and said, "Hey, we heard what you were saying, even though it wasn't. I didn't talk with these folks during it was afterwards." And so it was just really, really interesting to hear that and see where they were coming from in all of this. So.
Right. And JD, I'm hopeful that if I'm fortunate to get to the US Senate, even if, and I hope I'm wrong, but even if we don't have a Democratic majority in the Senate, I'm really hopeful that this is the kind of legislation I could actually get through. Because again, I agree with you, this is not necessarily a partisan issue. And I would hope that those people who are Republicans don't want to be seen as not wanting to support children and families. So.
Yeah, no. So moving on, it's when these kids go a little bit older, we move on to education. And where's my notes here? And that's healthcare. Sorry. At one of our town halls, we heard from 2 teachers' aides in Rolfe, which is a town of 549 people, about their lack of proper resources and enough support in the classroom. What are some of your plans for education?
Yeah. So the first plan is to listen to teachers and paraeducators. And I specifically wanted to mention paraeducators because, teachers and paraeducators do extremely difficult jobs. And the paraeducators in particular are often incredibly low paid. And again, it goes back to put your money where your mouth is, America. If we value education and we value children, then how about if we pay teachers for sure and paraeducators, who are always extremely important. Any teacher will tell you that. And of course, paraeducators know that. Especially when you have situations, for example, let's say you have a child with special needs, right? And that paraeducator works very closely with that child. That's incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And a lot of these paraeducators don't even have they're making like $10 an hour. They a lot in certain areas they don't even get benefits. They don't get. It's appalling, and much brighter light needs to be shined on the issue with paraeducators. So, how do we, as you and I know, of course, and everybody probably knows who's listening to this, education is still funded on a state level, right? The state, our property taxes pay for education. So what happens as a result of that is if you live in a high property value area with a bunch of higher value homes, your school is probably going to pay its teachers better, even pay its paras better, perhaps. It's going to have a really nice building with working air conditioning and heat. It's going to be in good repair. Your school's going to have orchestra, band, sports, theater, choir, right? All of these things that are all important for a child to have access to. A lot of kids, by the way, P.S., we need to fund the arts a lot better. A lot of kids, the reason that they succeed in school is because they don't like sports. They're not good at sports. They find their community in orchestra or band or the arts or choir, right? And when we cut those programs, calling them extra, we are getting rid of one huge source of a sense of strong community for a kid. My son he liked fencing, but he didn't ever do any like team sports. And he did like some martial arts earlier, but he didn't ever get into team sports. But he was in orchestra and he played the violin from the time he was in 5th grade all the way through high school. And that's where my son found his sense of community. And without that, he wouldn't have had, he wouldn't have had a very good experience, I don't think, because that's where he found like his tight-knit friends, was in orchestra. So, but we need to listen to teachers. We need to pay them more. We need to stop teaching to the test. We need to give our teachers more freedom and trust them that they get to know those kids really well, and they know this kid needs to learn this way, and maybe I need to approach this kid this other way. And we need to pay all of them more. And if that's going to take federal funding, and it probably will, then we need to look at that. I think we need to stop only funding schools for the most part with local property taxes, because then the schools in the lower property value areas get funded far less. And we've really got to resource those schools in those lower property taxes area, because those kids are already dealing with a major risk factor for failing in school, and that's just poverty. Poverty is a major risk factor. One of the highest correlations is between household income and academic success. The higher the household income, the more likely a child is to be successful academically. So this all circles back to, we raise minimum wage, right? Right. That may sound like, oh, raise minimum wage, whatever. That alone is going to solve, or at least not solve, I shouldn't say that, but it's going to mitigate a lot of problems. It's going to help reduce a lot of problems. When they raised the minimum wage in Seattle, I believe they documented it reduced the number of suicides.
Wow. Yeah.
That's how powerful economics and money are. Money is power. Money is choices. When we don't talk about money in this country, we are doing everyone a disservice.
Right.
We have to talk about it. So that was all a roundabout way of hopefully answer your question.
No, my last question, and then we'll open it up. We have a few good questions in line here. Healthcare. Allie in my district traveled over an hour and a half in labor to deliver a high-risk pregnancy. What are your plans to expand healthcare?
Right. Yeah. And obviously that's dangerous. And in a moral and wealthy nation, nobody should have to travel an hour and a half to find a hospital. I don't believe. We have to continue to support our rural hospitals. Again, whatever that takes, if that takes federal funding to bolster those hospitals, I tell you what else it's definitely going to take, no matter what kind of healthcare we end up with, because what we have right now, let's just all say it, it's not working. What we have right now isn't working, period. Whatever we end up with that's going to improve it or fix it, it has got to include higher reimbursement rates. And this is kind of a little talked about, little devil is in the details piece of healthcare. One of the reasons that some rural hospitals are having such a hard time is because almost all of their population is on Medicaid or Medicare, some combination. But since, especially in Iowa, there's such a large elderly population, or our elders live disproportionately in our rural areas in Iowa. And so we have a lot of people on Medicare using rural hospitals. And those reimbursement rates, the amount of money that is paid to the hospital for the services that the person on Medicare used is not high enough. Right. It's just not high enough. And so, hopefully we end up in DC together, and we can be standing up and advocating every day for the fact that we need higher reimbursement rates for Iowa for Medicare, because without it, we've got about 18% of our hospitals in Iowa are in danger of closing in the near future if something doesn't change fast. And that's just not okay. But as far as healthcare in a more general sense, my belief with healthcare is that healthcare in a moral and wealthy nation, and I think we all like to believe that's what we want, is a moral and wealthy nation, right? We have wealthy, and I hope we want moral. In a moral and wealthy nation with this much wealth, okay, we're the wealthiest nation on earth. Healthcare should be thought of as a fundamental human right. And here's the thing about human rights, JD, they're not for sale. They are not commodities. A human right is not a commodity that should be marketed, bought, and sold. And if you can afford it, you can get better human rights. But if you can't afford it, you don't get these human rights. If we talk about it that way, it suddenly becomes very obvious, oh, wow, we're doing it wrong. So that's my belief on that, that it's a fundamental human right. It's not a commodity. The way that I talk about it a lot with people is like a public library, because most people can understand that, right? A public library, I walk into a public library and I give them my library card and I get my book and I leave and I don't get out my debit card and I don't get a bill in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that book wasn't free. You're not going to hear me say free anything. I'm not going to say free college. I'm not going to say free healthcare. I'm not going to say, because it's not free. So it costs something. The library book costs something. The librarian gets a salary. The building that the library is housed in has, utilities to be paid. But we've all decided as a moral and wealthy nation, we're all going to pitch in together and we're all going to pay for that. So that when you walk in, you hand your card over, you get your health care, you walk out. You walk into a library, you hand out your card, you get a book, you walk out. That's what happens in some other capitalist nations like Canada, which by the way is capitalist. A lot of people aren't aware of that. They very much are. No socialism up there. It's capitalism. But it's what I would call, compassionate capitalism, right? It's definitely a capitalist country, but they have determined in Canada that their healthcare is going to be a human right. I have friends who live in Canada who all the time will say their jaw drops when they hear their stories from their American friends just over the border about, oh, my son broke his arm. Well, we have a $5,000 deductible plan. So that ER visit costs just $6,000. I guess we're paying $5,000 of that before our insurance even kicks in.
Yeah.
It's insane. And so my belief is that we need to ultimately, sooner than later, get to a universal single-payer healthcare system. We need to provide a just transition and a good transition for the people that are currently working in the healthcare industry, here in the United States and especially in Iowa, because there's a lot of healthcare worker or healthcare insurance industry workers in Des Moines in particular, and I absolutely know that. Many of my friends work for companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield. But here's the thing. A universal single payer plan is going to require workers too. It's not going to administer itself. And so there's a lot of ways that we can transition those workers. I say we give them good federal jobs with good benefits and pay them more than Blue Cross was paying them. We just got to go there. We got to go there. And, I hear people, of course, will ask me, well, what about a public option? What about a public option? I'm not stupid. I'm going to be one of 100 U.S. senators. If there's no votes for a universal single payer system, right? If it's like me and Sanders and Warren and Markley and that's it, whoever's willing to vote for universal single payer. If we don't have the votes, we don't have the votes. I can't force the votes to be there. Oh, how I wish I could. So I'm going to do whatever, I'm going to do whatever I can do. I'm going to look at whatever bill is in front of me and do the best I can to advocate for what I know needs to happen. Can I promise anything I've said tonight will ever happen? I can't promise that. I'm one of 100 U.S. senators. I can only persuade. I can tell stories. I can, provide all the evidence I can about why this is a good move financially for the United States and on and on. But in the end, I'm going to do my best and to advocate, which is what I've done for 20 years. And that's what I would try to do in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, fantastic. We're a little bit short on time, but I want to get through these questions. So Joe asked, what change do you want to make that will help single moms in Iowa the most? Or single parents.
Right. Yeah, probably the single most important thing is having a universal childcare program where there's a significant subsidy, on a stair-step fashion, so that, because right now what happens is we have something called the childcare cliff, where if you make 1 penny more than the subsidy amount allows, you're gone. You get zero subsidy, and you didn't suddenly make $150 more a week. So we got to significantly change that, and I think that would give people a lot more cash flow, spending money, if they didn't have to be paying huge costs for childcare.
That's exactly right. I did a lot of work in between last cycle and this cycle on the EITC, and that's one of the biggest things you learn is that, like, if somebody gets a $100 bonus or something like, or $200 bonus, that changes the whole trajectory of their tax system and everything.
It's like we're de-incentivizing hard work, which is
Right.
not what we want to be doing.
So, Cole asks, on the topic of childcare, what are both of your thoughts on, well, I'll just ask yours, on parental leave for both parents?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, when I say parental leave, I mean, no, I don't know if he means at the same time, but how a lot of other countries do it, different countries do it differently. Some do it so that parents can take only one parent at a time. Others have a more loose system where if both parents, let's say you get a total of, let's just say 12 months of paid parental leave. And so you could have mom take the first 6, dad take the next 6, or you could have mom and dad be there the first 6 months together, like, however you want to slice it, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what would make the most sense, but I'd be open to any permutations of that.
Yep. Good question here about the filibuster. Are you for it? Would you change it? And then it just goes on to say that it's distasteful, but also chilling to think what McConnell would have done in 2017, 2018 without it.
Right. So the short answer is that is a double-edged sword. And so whenever, I always like to think of things to their logical end conclusion and all possible what if, when I'm thinking of a policy position or a platform position. And so I understand the sentiment about wanting to end it, but I also would say, what if there's a day when you want it? Then what do? Right?
Yeah.
You voted to get rid of it, and now something comes up and you wish to God you had it. So, yeah, I mean,
one of my biggest issues on this is that a lot of folks are for it for the fact that they just assume we can't win in rural areas, we as Democrats, and to like the electoral college is going to stay there. I feel that we as Democrats have to be better and continue to go out there and do everything we can.
Right. I think that our ideas are the ones that are going to win, but Democrats have got to get out there and campaign like you did, JD, and campaign like I have, which I got to 85 counties before we had to pull the plug on the in-person visits. And then we did the rest by virtual events. So, I mean, I think I'm the only U.S. Senate candidate who's either been to or who has had specific events for every one of 99 counties. And that's how you win. Tom Harkin won every county in Iowa but one once. And that was when I believe that was the cycle when Ronald Reagan was elected.
Wow.
So this idea, I'm totally with you on this, JD. This idea that Democrats cannot win in red areas, I think is nonsense. I think if you go and talk to people and listen to people, and they can tell that you're passionate and authentic about wanting to stand up and fight for them, they will vote for a Democrat.
Right. Just a couple more questions and then we have to wrap things up here. Trying to get through them as much as possible. Daniel asked, what steps would you want the Senate to take in order to protect immigrant farm workers in Iowa?
Yes, that's a great question. So tomorrow at 11 a.m., I'll do a little plug. We're doing an immigration forum. You can hop over to our Facebook page to see that. And then we're doing another one next Saturday. But in the short term, I will just say we need to have an immigrant worker visa program. So there's no reason why people should be having to come here and work undocumented. If they want to come here and work, they should be able to be documented. And then if they want to ultimately get on a path to citizenship, we should have a framework for that to happen for them. We need immigrants.
Right.
We need immigrants, and we need to find a way for them to be here in a documented way.
Yeah. And one thing especially when it comes to agriculture, the visa program, it matches the coasts. It doesn't match our needs, our year-round needs. And
right.
So we have to adapt that. Gary, how you doing, Gary? He asked a question the other day, but he wants to ask it to you. Talk about public service workers and the pensions they've earned and protecting them.
Oh, well, yes. Yes, Gary, we want to protect public service workers' pensions and everyone's pensions and union workers' pensions that's a whole other ballywick we can talk about on our union town hall we're going to do in a few weeks. But we need to protect everybody's pension. If you're promised a pension, you better darn well get it. So, and the senators better stand up and fight for your right to receive what you worked for.
Yep. Absolutely. Sarah asks, along with your education plans, will there be advocating in Washington for more social workers in schools, more federal funding for children in homes suffering from substance abuse, and more constant family treatments or consistent family treatments and programs?
Yes, 100%. And I would also like to advocate for more family treatment courts like the one I work in Polk County. So that's really treating the whole family. It's surrounding the person that has the addiction or the mental health issues with a lot of support and weekly contact with a judge so that they feel like they've got more support and more accountability. And we should have that all over the country.
Awesome. Just to wrap things up, Carrie asked me a question, and I'm absolutely for it. So lastly, if people want to follow you more, where can they get information from?
Yeah, you can go to kimberlyforiowa.com. It's kimberlyforiowa.com. You can volunteer there, sign up to donate there. I am totally with JD. By the way, just full disclosure, I support JD's campaign like a little bit financially with my little $10 here and there when I can. And so I get JD's emails. So I get all of JD's emails. And I've seen him saying something that we say also lately, and that is, I put it this way, if you're hurting in these financial times, first, if you've got any extra bucks, help your friends or family. If they need your financial help, just give them your extra money. If you've got a few more dollars after that and you're lucky enough to have those resources, we will gratefully also accept your donations like JD will. So but take care of yourself first. Take care of yourself first. Yeah.
Absolutely. With that, thank you so much, Kimberly. Thanks for joining on. Best of luck. June 2nd's the primary.
And vote by mail. Please don't go to the ballot. Please don't go to the polls. Please get your ballot in the mail and vote by mail, which you can now request your absentee ballot form now. You can request it now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck, and we'll see you hopefully soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Katie. Appreciate it.